My 17-year-old sister got pregnant, screamed that I owed her every cent of my savings for not stopping her, and drained me dry for a decade until her custody hearing exposed exactly where the money really went. Ren sat across from me at the kitchen table, both hands flat on the wood like she was bracing for impact. Her face was pale. Her eyes were red. "I'm pregnant," she said. I didn't move. The refrigerator hummed behind me. Somewhere upstairs, a floorboard creaked. "Okay," I said because I didn't know what else to say. "Okay, we'll figure this out. Does Mom know? Does Dad?" She looked at me then, and something in her face changed. It hardened. "This is your fault," she said. I actually laughed. One short, disbelieving breath. "What? You were supposed to watch me." Her voice climbed. "You knew about Holt. You knew I liked him. You should have locked the door. You should have told Mom what I was doing. Ren, I'm not your parent. You act like it enough when it's convenient for you," she snapped. "You had one job this summer. Watch me. And you couldn't even do that." I sat there with my mouth open, 19 years old, trying to find the sentence that would make this make sense, and finding nothing. My little sister was 17 and pregnant, and somehow, in the space of 90 seconds, I had become the reason. I didn't know yet that this was the first sentence of a story that would take 11 years to finish. I didn't know that the words, "This is your fault," would become a kind of currency, one she would spend for the rest of my 20s. I just sat there, sick to my stomach, staring at my little sister's shaking hands, and I believed her. That belief cost me $192,000. I was 19 that summer. Ren was 17. We grew up in Dayton, Ohio, in a rental house on Fenwick Avenue that our parents never managed to buy, no matter how many double shifts they pulled. Mom worked nights at the Bellcrest plant on the east side, running an assembly line for auto parts. Dad worked the same shift, different building. They left at 6 every evening and came home at 4 in the morning, which meant that from the time I was 15, I was the one who made dinner, checked homework, and made sure the doors were locked. I took it seriously. I want to be clear about that, because for years I doubted myself over it. I made Ren's lunches. I drove her to volleyball practice in Dad's old Buick. When she had a fever, I was the one who sat up with her, not our parents, because they were asleep before their shift and gone before either of us woke up. What I didn't know, because I was 19 and trusted my sister, was that Ren had been sneaking out 3 nights a week to meet Holt Ashby, a boy from 2 streets over who was 20 and worked at his uncle's auto shop. She'd climb out her bedroom window after I went to bed. I found out later she'd been doing it since March. I found out about the pregnancy in June. There was an earlier incident that I didn't think much of at the time, but that reads different now. In April of that year, Ren asked me for $60 for a school trip fund. I gave it to her without asking questions because that's what I did. Weeks later, I found out there was no school trip. She'd used it to buy Holt a birthday gift, a leather wallet from the mall. When I asked her about it, she cried and said I was making her feel like a criminal for having a boyfriend. I apologized. I remember apologizing to her at 17 for asking where 60 of my own dollars had gone. That was the pattern already forming, though I couldn't see it yet. Ren would take something. Ren would get caught. Ren would flip the emotional weight onto me so fast that I ended up comforting her instead of the other way around. There was a smaller version of that same pattern almost every month that spring. She'd borrow $20 for gas money and come back with a new phone case instead. She'd ask to use my car just to see a friend and roll back in 4 hours later smelling like a bonfire, with Holt's jacket still slung over her shoulders. I noticed those things. I just never added them up into anything, because Ren had always been the kind of kid who bent small rules, and I'd always been the kind of older brother who covered for her instead of reporting it. I thought that was loyalty. I didn't understand yet that loyalty without limits is just an open account with no interest cap. Before all of it broke, we'd actually been close. In the plain, unremarkable way, siblings are close when nobody's counting anything. I taught her to drive stick in an empty church parking lot on Sunday mornings. She used to fall asleep on the couch during horror movies and pretend afterward that she hadn't been scared. We had a whole language of inside jokes built out of nothing much. A mispronounced word from a family vacation. A nickname for the neighbor's dog. I think about that version of her sometimes. The one who existed before the story needed a villain and a debtor. And I still don't fully understand the exact night she decided I'd make a better wallet than a brother. When our parents found out about the pregnancy, they didn't sit Ren down. They sat me down. Dad's exact words at the kitchen table on a Tuesday night in June were, "You're the oldest. You had one job." Mom didn't yell. She was worse than yelling. She cried for the better part of a week, quiet tears at the sink, at the table, in the car. And then one night she came into my room, sat on the edge of my bed, and said the sentence that would define the next decade of my life. "You owe her," she said. "You owe her the childhood she doesn't get to have now." I was 19. I didn't argue. Some small, guilty part of me believed her. I had been the one home. I had been the one responsible. Maybe if I'd checked her phone, maybe if I'd noticed the window unlatched, this wouldn't have happened. I told myself that story so many times over the following years that it stopped feeling like a story and started feeling like a fact. So it began. Small at first, and always framed as fairness rather than favor. I paid for Ren's maternity clothes that fall, about $400 from a motherhood maternity outlet in the Dayton Mall. I paid for the crib and the changing table in October October, another $600. When Poppy was born on February 3rd, 2017, I paid the hospital bill because the insurance through Mom and Dad's plant didn't cover a dependent's dependent, and Ren looked at me from the hospital bed and said, "You did this, so you fix it." The bill was $8,200. I paid it in installments over the following year, working 2 jobs, one at a hardware store and one doing weekend deliveries. At Poppy's first birthday party, in the backyard on Fenwick Avenue with both sides of the family crowded around a fold-out table, Ren stood up with the cake knife still in her hand. She was 19 by then, and she'd had a year to refine the story. "Everyone raise a glass," she said, smiling. "To my sister, who ruined my life and is still paying rent on it." People laughed. My aunt laughed. My own mother laughed and raised her plastic cup of lemonade like it was a toast worth making. I smiled and clapped along, because in that yard in front of that family, correcting her would have made me the villain of a story I had never agreed to be in. That was the shape of things for years. Ren married Holt in September of 2020, a backyard wedding because they said they couldn't afford a venue. I paid $22,000, half the total cost, because Ren called me 2 weeks before the date and said, "You still owe me for high school. You think a few $1,000s evens that out?" I didn't ask what she meant by high school anymore. I'd stopped asking what anything meant. I just wrote the check. In 2021, Ren and Holt bought a 3-bedroom house on Larchmere Court, 20 minutes from where we grew up. I covered the down payment, $40,000, wired directly to the title company 2 days before closing. Ren hugged me tight in the driveway, in front of the realtor, and said, loud enough for the woman to hear, "See, this is what family does when they ruin somebody's life." The realtor gave me a strange look. I remember that look more clearly than I remember the house. When Poppy turned 5, Ren called about private school, Ridgeview Christian Academy, $12,000 a year. "Do you want her stuck in public school because of what you did to me?" she asked. I paid that too, every August on time, for 4 straight years. $48,000 by the time Poppy turned 9. Somewhere in between all of that, in the winter of 2022, Ren called me about Poppy's health. She said Poppy needed a specialist in Columbus, an hour and a half away, for what she described as possible developmental delays, and that insurance wouldn't cover the evaluation. $2,200, she said, for the first round of testing alone. I drove up with her myself that January and sat in the waiting room while she took Poppy in. When she came out an hour later, she said the doctor wanted a second round of testing, another $1,600, before he could rule anything out. I paid both invoices without ever seeing a single page of paperwork from the clinic. I asked once, gently, if I could see the results. Ren's eyes filled with tears in the parking lot. "You want proof my daughter might be struggling?" she said. "That's what you're asking me for right now?" I apologized before we even got back in the car. I never saw a diagnosis, a report, or a follow-up appointment. Looking back, I don't think there ever was one. I want to pause here because there's a part of this story I need you to understand clearly before I keep going. Quick pause from the story. If you enjoy these stories, consider taking a listen to our Spotify show linked in the description for early access to new stories and better audio quality. Now back to the video. I started to notice things around 2022, small inconsistencies that I filed away instead of confronting, because confronting Ren always cost more than it was worth. Ren never worked, not once. In 11 years, did she hold a job longer than a few weeks. Holt worked constantly at the auto shop, and later managing it, but their house kept getting bigger additions, a finished basement, a new deck. Their vacations kept getting longer. In 2023, they spent 9 days in Cabo San Lucas. I saw the photos on Ren's Instagram before I paid the tuition invoice that same month. Poppy had a walk-in closet full of clothes with tags still on them, clothes I never once saw her wear twice. At a 4th of July barbecue in 2023, Holt's sister Dawn made an offhand comment while we were both getting drinks from the cooler. She laughed and said, "Ren always says your guilt is the best retirement plan she's ever found." She said it like a joke. I laughed too, because that's what you do at a barbecue. But it sat wrong in my stomach for weeks afterward, the way a splinter sits wrong under skin you can't quite reach. I brought it up once, gently, at a family dinner in early 2024. I asked if maybe, after everything, I'd paid enough. The table went silent. Ren's face went cold in a way I recognized from 100 other tables. "You still think this is about money?" she said. "You took my whole life away from me at 17. A car and a house payment is nothing compared to what you cost me." My mother nodded along like Ren had just recited scripture. Dad stared at his plate. I apologized again, the way I always did, and I paid for Poppy's dance recital costume the following week. So I kept paying. Every birthday, every emergency, every single time, the same 4 words waiting behind Ren's eyes, even when she didn't say them out loud. "You still owe me." Then, in March of 2026, Holt filed for divorce. 2 months later, in May, he filed for full custody of Poppy. Ren called me at midnight, crying so hard I could barely understand her. "You have to come to the hearing," she said. "You have to tell the judge how hard I've had it, how you ruined my life at 17 and I still managed to raise a daughter alone." I said yes. Of course I said yes. 11 years of believing a story doesn't undo itself in a single phone call. I bought a new coat for the hearing. I rehearsed quietly, in my car, what I would say to a judge about my sister's hard life. I sat in the back row of that Montgomery County courtroom on a Tuesday morning in June, my good coat buttoned, ready to tell a stranger in a black robe that my sister deserved sympathy. I still believed the story I had been paying into for 11 years. I had no idea I was about to watch it collapse in real time. Holt's lawyer stood up first, a woman named Renata Kessler, with a manila folder 3 inches thick set square on the table in front of her. "Your Honor," she said, "we'd like to enter financial records into evidence, specifically wire transfers and payments from the respondent's brother, totaling $192,000 across a period of 11 years. I felt my stomach drop straight through the floor. $192,000. I had never once sat down and added it all up. I had paid it piece by piece, invoice by invoice, guilt trip by guilt trip, and never once looked at the total sum of what those pieces made. Kessler kept going, flipping through the folder with the calm efficiency of someone who had done this 100 times. "These funds were represented to Mr." She gestured toward me without using my name. "As necessary financial support for the minor child, Poppy Ashby. Our review of bank statements and credit card records shows a different pattern of use." She clicked through printed slides on an easel beside her. "A resort receipt from Cabo San Lucas, September 2023, $4,100. A lease agreement for a Mercedes GLC, signed in Ren's name in 2022, $640 a month. A membership invoice from a boutique gym in Beaver Creek, Ohio, $180 a month since 2021. None of it was Poppy's. None of it had anything to do with a daughter's private school or medical bills." Ren's face had gone white beside me. "That's not what that money was for," she whispered, mostly to herself, gripping the edge of the wooden bench. "Furthermore, Your Honor," Kessler said, "we have text messages between the respondent and Dawn Ashby, my client's sister, dated the exact week of Poppy's conception in the summer of 2016. The courtroom went quiet in a way that felt physical, a pressure change in the air. Ren grabbed my arm hard enough to leave a mark. "Don't listen to this," she hissed. "She's lying. She's trying to make me look unfit in front of the judge." Kessler lifted a single printed page from the folder. "Your Honor, may I read the first message into the record?" The judge, an older woman with silver hair pulled back tight, leaned forward over her desk and said the only 4 words that mattered in that entire room. "Read it," she said. Kessler cleared her throat and read the message aloud, dated July 9th, 2016, sent from Ren's phone number to Dawn's. In it, 17-year-old Ren told Dawn she was, in her own words, probably going to get pregnant this summer, and honestly, it's not the worst plan because my sister already feels like she owes me everything, and once there's a baby involved, she'll never say no to anything again. I heard the words. I understood every single one of them, and for a long moment I could not make my body do anything at all. Not blink, not breathe, not turn my head. It hadn't been an accident that spiraled into a decade of guilt. It had been a plan, drafted at 17 years old, before the pregnancy even happened. I hadn't failed to stop something. I had been the target of something, chosen deliberately because I was the kind of person who would say yes. Kessler read a second message from later that same week, where Ren told Dawn that even if the pregnancy didn't work out this time, she'd try again, because in her words, guilt doesn't expire. He'll pay for this one way or another for the rest of his life. He, not my sister, ruined my life. He, even in a private message to her future sister-in-law, years before I ever knew Dawn existed, Ren had already cast me as a debtor in a ledger only she could see. I sat very still. I felt 11 years of my life rearrange themselves in front of me. Every dollar, every birthday, every backyard toast with a cake knife, suddenly visible in a different light. I hadn't been paying a debt. I had been paying a bet Ren made when she was 17 and won for over a decade. Ren stood up so fast her chair scraped hard against the floor. "This is out of context," she said, loud, her voice cracking. "You don't know what I meant. That was a joke between friends. That's not—" "Sit down, Mrs. Ashby," the judge said without looking up. "You don't understand," Ren said, turning now toward me instead of the judge, tears streaking fast down her face. "I was scared. I was 17. People say stupid things when they're scared." I finally found my voice, and it came out flat and quiet, which surprised me more than anything else that day. "You didn't say something stupid once," I said. "You planned it, and then you spent 11 years making sure I never found out." "That's not fair," she said. "No," I said. "It's not. None of it was." Kessler continued, undeterred, laying out spending patterns line by line. 61% of the funds I had sent over 11 years, according to the forensic accountant Holt had hired, had gone toward Ren's personal expenses. Clothing, travel, the car lease, a boutique gym membership renewed automatically every month since 2021. Only the remainder had gone toward anything resembling Poppy's actual needs, and even some of that, the private school tuition specifically, had been used as collateral for a personal loan Ren took out in 2024 without telling anyone. Holt sat at the other table, jaw tight, staring at his hands. I watched something shift in his face, too. The same slow-motion collapse I felt in my own chest. He had believed a version of this story as well, just a different chapter of it. He'd believed his wife was scraping by on her own, propped up by a guilty brother, when in fact she'd been funding a lifestyle he had no idea existed. said, using tuition and childcare as the language to keep the money flowing. My mother, 3 rows up, had gone silent. I hadn't even realized she was in the courtroom until that moment, but I saw the back of her neck, the way her shoulders had drawn in tight, and I understood that she was hearing, in real time, the same recontextualization I was. The judge called a 15-minute recess. I sat alone on that hard wooden bench, my new coat suddenly feeling like a costume from a play I'd been performing in for 11 years, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Not rage, not yet. Grief. A specific, quiet grief for the sister I thought I'd had, the one I'd genuinely believed I owed something to. When the hearing resumed, Kessler asked me directly if I would be willing to testify to the financial records, since I had made the transfers myself. I said yes. I stood up when they called me. I walked to the small witness area beside the judge's bench, and for the first time in 11 years, I looked at my sister and said something true instead of something apologetic. I paid you $192,000, I said, because I believed I owed you a childhood I took from you. I know now I didn't take anything. You planned this before it happened, and you've been billing me for a debt that never existed. Ren's lawyer, a younger man clearly caught flat-footed by the messages, tried to object on relevance grounds. The judge overruled him without even looking up from her notes. Is there anything else you'd like to state for the record? The judge asked me. Just one thing, I said. I'm not paying for anything else. Not tuition, not a lease, not a birthday. That's done. Ren didn't scream. That was almost the strangest part. She just sat there, small in her chair, staring at the messages Kessler had projected onto the easel, as if she was only now, at 27 years old, seeing the full shape of the thing she'd built when she was 17. For a moment, before the bailiff called the next matter, the room seemed to hold its breath around her. My mother had her hand pressed over her mouth. Dawn wouldn't look up from her lap. Even the judge, who had clearly seen every version of family dysfunction a courtroom could offer, paused a beat longer than procedure required before moving her notes aside. Ren opened her mouth once, like she meant to say something else, some final version of the story that might still land the way the others had. Nothing came out. For the first time in 11 years, there was no room left in the story for me to be the one who was wrong. The custody ruling came down 2 weeks later. Holt was granted primary custody of Poppy, with Ren receiving supervised visitation pending a financial review the court ordered given the discrepancies in how child-related funds had been used. It wasn't punitive framing on paper. It was just facts laid end to end, which turned out to be the most damning thing of all. The fallout in the family didn't happen all at once. It happened in phone calls over about 6 weeks. My mother called me first, 4 days after the hearing. She didn't apologize outright. She said, I didn't know about the messages, which wasn't quite the same thing, but it was something. I told her I understood that she hadn't known, but that she'd spent 11 years enforcing a debt she'd invented in my bedroom on a Tuesday night, and that part hadn't required any hidden messages to see. She was quiet on the phone for a long time. She still calls now, less often, and we're both still figuring out what's left to say to each other. My father hasn't called at all. I don't know if that's shame or stubbornness. Maybe both. Dawn, of all people, reached out to me in July. She said she'd felt sick since the hearing, knowing she'd had those messages sitting in an old phone backup for years, and never thought to mention the joke that clearly hadn't been a joke. She apologized. I believed her, mostly because she didn't ask me for anything afterward, which had become, without my noticing, the way I measured whether someone in this story was being honest with me. Holt and I talked once, briefly, outside the courthouse the day the ruling came down. He looked wrecked, the particular kind of wrecked that comes from realizing you built a decade of your life next to someone who was running a separate operation the whole time. I'm sorry you got dragged into this, he said. I told him he didn't have anything to apologize for. We didn't become friends, but we don't avoid each other at family gatherings anymore either, which is its own kind of small repair. He mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that he'd found other things too, going through old accounts during the divorce filing, small subscriptions and charges he'd never questioned because Ren always had an explanation ready before he even finished asking. I recognized the description immediately. It was the same rhythm I'd lived inside for 11 years, just aimed at a different wallet, on a shorter timeline. Ren tried to reach me 4 times after the hearing. 2 texts, asking to talk this through as a family. 1 voicemail, her voice thin, saying she never meant for it to go this far, that she'd just been a scared kid making a bad joke that spiraled. 1 email, longer, defensive in places, apologetic in others, ending with a line asking if I could help with a lawyer for the financial review, since her savings, it turned out, had never really existed. I didn't answer the email. Some debts really don't exist. Others, apparently, never did either. The financial review the court ordered turned up more than either lawyer had expected. Ren had taken out a second personal loan in early 2025, $6,000, using a forged copy of a tuition invoice as proof of expense to the lender. That part wasn't my problem to solve, but it became a criminal referral, and by August, she was dealing with a fraud investigator instead of just a family court. She called Dad about it first, apparently, hoping he'd co-sign something to make it quietly disappear. He told her no, which was the first time in 11 years I'd heard of my father refusing her anything. It didn't fix what he'd said to me at 19, but it mattered anyway. My mother started seeing accounts counselor that August on her own, without me asking her to. She told me about it almost sheepishly, like she expected me to make a joke out of it. I didn't. I think some part of her had known for years that the story she'd handed me at 19 didn't hold together, and it took a courtroom to make her finally look at it directly instead of around it. Poppy, for what it's worth, adjusted better than any of us expected. Kids are strange that way. She started spending Sunday afternoons with me, just the two of us, usually at the same diner on Wilmington Pike that Ren used to take her to as a toddler. She never asks about the money. She asks about the card game and whether I'll come to her recital, and I always say yes because that yes finally costs me nothing but time. I grieved her anyway. That's the part people don't expect when I tell this story. I grieved the sister I thought I had for 11 years, the one who hugged me in that driveway, who I believed on some level I really had let down. Losing a person who was never quite real still costs something. You don't get to skip the mourning just because the thing you're mourning turns out to have been a performance. There were logistical messes for months afterward. My accountant helped me file amended returns for 4 years of the payments I'd claimed as gifts, since some had legal implications tied to the custody case discovery. I hired my own lawyer briefly, just to make sure none of the funds I'd sent could be clawed into some kind of liability against me, given how tangled the loan collateral situation with the tuition had become. None of it was catastrophic. All of it was tiring, in the low, grinding way that comes after a long con finally surfaces. I'm 30 now. I bought a small house on the west side of Dayton last year, on my own, with the money I would have otherwise handed over the moment Ren called with a new emergency. I still see Poppy. Holt makes sure of that, and honestly, so do I. She's 9, funny, obsessed with a card game I don't fully understand, and she has no idea what any of this cost, which is exactly how it should be. I think about that kitchen table often, the one on Fenwick Avenue where a 17-year-old told me I owed her a childhood. I believed her for 11 years, not because I was foolish, but because guilt, when it's handed to you early enough and often enough, starts to feel indistinguishable from truth. I paid it because I loved my sister, and because I thought love and debt were the same currency. They're not. I know that now. The truth I carry out of all of this isn't that my sister was cruel, though she was, in a way she'd probably never admit even to herself. The truth is quieter than that. Guilt is not a debt. It never was. Somebody can hand you a story about what you owe them, and if you're the kind of person who says yes without checking the math, you can spend a decade paying interest on something that was never real. I got pregnant, my sister once said, screaming at 17 years old in a kitchen that smelled like dinner I'd made for her, and for 11 years I believed that sentence meant I owed her everything. It took a courtroom, a stack of bank records, and a message she sent before I even knew what was coming, to show me the truth. She never owed me an apology I was waiting for. I owed myself one, for not asking the question sooner. Some nights I still catch myself doing the math out of habit, converting some ordinary expense into what it would have cost me under the old arithmetic, before I remember there's no ledger left to feed. It's a strange kind of freedom, quiet and a little unfamiliar. The way a room feels bigger once you've finally moved out furniture you'd stopped noticing was even there. I paid $192,000 to learn that lesson. I like to think most days that it was worth exactly what it cost, and not 1 cent more.